you're the director of the Harvard Writing Center, and you work with undergraduate students and I believe also graduate students to help them improve their writing. As an educator, as a teacher of writing, what are you seeing, and what do you make of all this? Let's just sort of ease our way into this very, very big topic that I'm still trying to grapple with. I think a lot of people are, but you've been articulating some very interesting viewpoints about this, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
A useful way that I've found to explain my concern about this and to think about my concern is the difference between process and product, right? So ChatGPT creates a written product. You say to it, write me a college paper, write me some real estate listings, write me an investment report, whatever it is that you're doing in your field, and out it comes, right? It's a complete product. So that's one way of thinking about it. This machine can do our writing for us. But when you teach writing, you're not really in search of a product, you're in search of a thought process, right? For my students, I'm much less interested in what the product is. We can get a product from anywhere. What I'm interested in is, what are they interested in? What kinds of questions do they have? And how does the process of writing in answer to a question help you figure out what you think? And that's not what ChatGPT is designed to do, right? It's a product. So I think that for educators, the concern, and it's a very reasonable and real concern, is if what we're really trying to do is teach critical thinking and help our students become people who understand the world, know what they think, know what they want to ask questions about, it's hard to imagine that this chat bot is the way to achieve that goal. And yet it's there and it's easily accessible and people are using it. So now we have to figure out how we coexist with this technology.
Right. I've seen you do a couple of experiments with it. You write, you have a Substack called Writing Hacks, which I love. And you've been writing a little bit there about your experimentation with Chat GPT. I've been experimenting a bit with it and having some fun. For example, I asked Chat GPT, I gave a prompt to write a blog post on how to write with more impact, but in the style of William Shakespeare. And it was hilarious, of course, totally, utterly useless. But so you're talking about, as an educator, you're focused on, teaching, working through the process, teaching the process of writing as a way to teach how to think, right? How to articulate your thoughts on paper or on the computer.
If you think about it this way, so for example, a piece of writing advice that I always give that people seem to find very helpful is that when you are writing a draft of something, you always figure out what you think along the way. So it's helpful to look in that last paragraph in the conclusion, right? To say, all right, maybe this is actually my main point. I've written myself to my main idea. So that's a process. And that happens to my students a lot. They'll find the thing that they want to be their thesis in the conclusion of that first draft. But it also happens to all of us when we write at work, right? You may sit down to think through a memo or to think through some plan. And as you're writing, you realize, oh no, actually, this is what I want to say, or this is what we need to focus on. So what happens when instead of going through that process, you prompt the chat bot, you say, write me a memo about X or write me a paper about X. Now, perhaps in the optimistic framing of this, out comes this output and you realize it's not what you think, and you go back and you work through that same process that you would have gone through without prompting the chat bot first, and you still figure out this thing that you think that matters to you. But do you, or do you take this output, this product that looks okay in certain ways, and just that becomes your idea, that becomes what you go with? And what are we losing in that process? In my experiments with the chatbot, it can write me a paper about a variety of things. Right now, it's not the greatest paper, right? But it looks like a paper. Am I going to hand that in, or am I going to do something with that, revise that in some way, instead of ever figuring out what my idea would have been if I had started without the chat bot. And I guess I think, I'm idealistic as a writing teacher. There's no point in doing any of this if you're not figuring out what you actually think. I tell this to my students all the time. Like, this is not a little hoop to jump through to show me that you can put words on a page. I know you can put words on a page. We are doing this because I think, and I hope you think, it's important that you figure out what you believe, what matters to you in the world about this idea, what side of this issue makes sense to you. When you go through the process of analyzing evidence, you're actually figuring out whether that evidence makes sense to you, what that evidence points towards. What happens when you just put a passage into the chatbot and say, analyze this evidence? I want us to be asking the question, just because a machine can do something, does that mean a machine should do the thing? Again, sort of like, Glenn, I like to read your posts on LinkedIn. If you told me your posts were entirely generated by ChatGPT, I don't think I would want to read them anymore, right? That's not interesting to me. So we could ask, why is that? Well, it's because I want to know what Glenn is thinking about right now. And if Glenn types into the machine, which we know a lot of content is already generated this way, right? Not yours, but if Glenn types into the machine, write a post about, how content creators are losing work because of ChatGPT. I can do that myself, right? I don't need to read you doing that. So I think we're going to need to find the place where the human connection matters. And the idea, and partly, as a writer and a writing teacher, I've always kind of resisted the terminology of content creation as opposed to writing, because it sounds sort of like, who wants to read content and who wants to engage with content? I want to engage with ideas, and ideas come from a human. And I feel like this may be just another step towards this idea that the product, it doesn't matter who created the product is just there. But then it always has mattered, right? So if you ask people, do you want to read a novel that's been entirely generated by AI? Some people might say, sure, that's entertaining. Other people will say no, because this author that worked hard to create this world, that's part of my experience of reading this, is that it came from another human being's mind. And it's possible that we will adjust to a world in which that human being first generates a draft with AI and then edits it. Right now, that seems depressing to me. I may be, I think about this for a living, so I may be an outlier in finding that depressing, but I think we should all stop and think about whether that's the world we actually want to live in. Now, does that translate to if someone writes a real estate listing, or am I as upset if I find out that the way this house I might want to buy has been described was written by ChatGPT? Probably not. So we
Right.
have to figure out where that line is.
Exactly.